What is up, everybody? Welcome back. I hope you are having a great day. I've got a great video today for you guys. We're doing our off-season interviews. We just spoke to a Notre Dame person the other day. We've been doing Iowa, FSU, Gators. We are working our way around the country. And I have a very special guest with me today to talk some LSU football. As always, I am Sam Forney, the host of this show. Joined today, Bryce, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. My name's Bryce Kuhn, one of the staff writers over at Go 24/7, the LSU 24/7 site. And you and I were just joking before we got started. What a day as we're recording this on the day the transfer portal opens.
This is the day
Now
to talk college football offseason.
it is, yeah. I mean, it's quite crazy. So, man, I'm pumped to be here and talk college football with you.
Same here. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on. Like we just said, I know it's super busy today. I'm sure there's going to be reports coming out all day across the transfer portal and stuff like that. But without further ado, let's get straight into this because I do have a lot to go over. It's a great time in college football right now in the off season. We don't have actual games, but we do have spring games. We do have, the transfer portal. We have breaking news pretty much all day, every day for this next few days. But with that being said, I do want to take a look at the roster and do a little breakdown of where we're at right now. Obviously, coming off of what some would say maybe is a bit of a disappointing year. A couple losses that maybe you want to get back, maybe some performances on the defense that you want to get back. Even though you get the Heisman year out of Jaden Daniels, it didn't quite get the team where they wanted to be in the end. Now we're going into this offseason. We've got a new quarterback. We've still got Brian Kelly, got a new top 10 recruiting class coming in. It's just a new look. It's a new look on the team. Everybody got new receivers stepping up. What, in your eyes, are kind of the strengths and weaknesses of this roster that you've observed so far in the offseason?
Yeah, and it's perfect timing for this question, really, Sam, because we just wrapped up the spring game on Saturday. So,
Exactly.
one of the biggest things is you mentioned it, like no more Jaden Daniels. That's a guy that's going to hear his name called in the first few picks. It feels like here in a couple of weeks with the NFL draft. So where do you go? You mentioned Garrett Nussmeier is that guy, and I do think that is a strength when you look across the SEC. Look, Georgia has Carson Beck coming back. That's an NFL talent.
Yep.
After that, there's a couple of guys that you say, hey, they could be really good.
Mm-hmm.
Nussmeier's kind of in that weird spot of where he's a junior technically, but he hasn't
Right.
played a ton, and so it's a strength in the sense of he's been in the system. He knows
Mm-hmm.
what it takes to be a college football player, and so I think that's a strength for them going into the year. He looked really, really good in the spring game. The chemistry that he had with some of the returning receivers, a guy like Kyron Lacey, who's expected to take a big jump, but even some of the transfers as well. Former Mississippi State, Xavier Thomas, and then obviously CJ Daniels, which was a standout guy for Liberty last year, did
Yes.
phenomenal.
That was the big
So,
get in the portal.
yeah, I mean, he is every bit as advertised when you talk about big-bodied receivers. So I think that the offense is going to be a strength. That sounds a lot like what we talked about last year.
Yeah.
The weakness is still kind of the defense. Now, I will say the staff is way better. They improved with their hires. Bo Davis on the defensive line, Blake Baker, the new defensive coordinator, bringing in other guys, Corey Raymond on the back end of the defense. They did a really good job of that. Issue is the personnel is kind of largely the same. So can the coaching make up for maybe that gap on the roster and kind of a lack of depth? I mean, the portal opened today. LSU has kind of publicly announced, you could probably say, with Brian Kelly
Yeah.
speaking about it in one of his latest pressers, defensive line is what we need. They had
And that's
a
a
walk-on
premium right
rookie
now
second
across the
time.
college football landscape. Everybody wants, especially defensive tackles. Everybody wants their tackles, ends too. I mean, defensive line is just a premium right now.
Yeah, and it's going to be a position where, look, it's no secret you're going to have to pay a pretty penny to go get
Yeah.
the top guy on the market, and LSU is going to have to kind of fill that need because there really just isn't. They don't have the numbers there. So I would say right now that's a weakness, but as well as I do, Sam, with the transfer
Yeah.
portal, with development of these guys, maybe they can kind of shore that up and create that into a strength before they kick off against USC in Las Vegas.
Yeah, and USC, funny to mention, they probably are in a similar situation. It feels like every year, especially with Lincoln Riley there, where they need their defense shored up too. That feels like maybe a shootout right now, especially if Miller Moss is, the guy that he was against Louisville. But you mentioned it. I mean, the biggest piece in this puzzle, Garrett Nussmeier, new quarterback, same system though. So you're right, he's grown into it. And where does he fit in? Carson Beck, obviously an NFL talent. I feel very passionately about Quinn Ewers. I think, in my opinion, I would take him as the best quarterback in the SEC. That's just me. And then you got, the Jackson Darts, the Jalen Milrose, the Graham Mertz. And you're right, Garrett fits right in with that group, if not towards the top of that. group, and he has good receivers coming. So the offense, you always expect it to be a strength. Harold Perkins does come back. You kind of expect him to maybe take a step that didn't get taken last year, maybe from that freshman year, and he's going to be good. But you're going to need the defense at the end of the day. It's going to have to step up if you want to compete with that schedule. With the spring portal open, though, I mean, I feel very confidently that LSU can bring in the pieces that they need to bring in, and I don't have to worry anymore. I'm personally a Florida State fan, and I'm done seeing them on the schedule in September every year, so I don't have to worry about whatever they do in the offseason now. But I feel like with the spring portal window, it's the perfect time for a big brand like LSU to capitalize and maybe fill in those last gaps on the defense.
Well, and I add this too, real quick, Sam. You mentioned you're a Florida State fan. That's exactly
Yeah,
what Florida State did last spring portal cycle.
exactly.
That's what LSU needs to find. I believe Keon Coleman was kind of down to LSU and Florida State last year. Ends up
Hmm.
picking Florida State. They also got Braden Fisk out of the portal. Just finding, it doesn't have to be a star. It doesn't have to be Florida State had that last year,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be a star. It just has to be a guy that can go in and give you 30 to 40 snaps, every single Saturday and can play high quality SEC level football. So I think that's kind of what they're looking for, especially with, this spring portal opening today.
Yeah, and just someone who can get developed too. I feel like development
Mhm.
is so important. I mean, a lot of times these guys come in from smaller programs and they just get developed in somewhere where they fit better, and then they blossom into a star. But um, as far as maybe the incoming class, right? Like the incoming recruits, obviously we don't always see freshmen play right. You almost never see it make an impact right away. But when you look at this class, it is a top 10 class according to On3. Are there any potential breakout freshmen that you see that could make an impact right away?
Yeah, that 2024 class was really special in terms of them locking down the state of Louisiana. You kind of take a
Mhm.
look at the rankings. They did a really good job of that, of making sure that, hey, the best talent in this state, we're not letting them leave. So they did a great job of that. And I think you have to applaud Brian Kelly and his staff. After Ed Orgeron was let go, there was a worry about, hey, the really talented players, when you go back and look at the history of what the state of Louisiana has produced, we need to keep those guys in state. There was a transitional period when Brian Kelly first got here, but for that first true recruiting cycle 2 years ago, great job. This one was another one that you kind of felt like, all right, they're starting to make some headway. They did a good job with that. But you mentioned a couple names, to mention a couple names. I'd have to first start with a guy that plays the back end. I got to see him a lot during his high school career. It's Deshaun McBride. The safety who played really, really well in the spring game, has impressed a lot of people, just with his,
He's
how
their
even
highest rated
keel he
recruit
is.
too, according
Yeah.
to On3.
Yeah. I mean, he's just even keeled. So I think that's like the biggest thing when you look at a freshman, like you mentioned. It's very rare that we see true freshmen
Yeah.
come and be able to play. The one guy that I continue to tell people, like when they ask about, well, is this freshman ready to play? Like, you have to be playing like Caleb Downs did in Alabama this past year, and he's Ohio State.
Yeah.
That's a special, unique type of player. We don't see all those. I'm not saying Deshaun McBride's going to be that, but some of the traits that Caleb Downs had of just kind of being composed and understanding and not letting the moment get too big, McBride has that. Another one is PJ Woodland, who was kind of a steal for them late in the process. They're able to get him out of the state of Mississippi, was committed to Mississippi State at one point. I believe was one of the top players in that state per different cycles, different websites and
Yeah.
services as well. So, Woodland has really impressed at the cornerback position. Now, he's small in terms of he's still got the high school body. He's got to kind of get into the nutrition and the weightlifting program at the college level. But just his ability to play the ball, play receivers, was something that, Corey Raymond has really raved about. And that's huge for this group that really struggled on the back end of the defense last year. And then one more for you. I know we're staying on the defensive side of the football, but
That's what
Gabe,
matters.
yeah, it's what matters for them. Gabriel Relaford, out of kind of the Shreveport, Louisiana area, out of Evangel Christian, that's a guy that they were able to kind of get late. He was committed to Texas A&M, kind of backed off of that unofficially, and then they were able to kind of get the commitment from him. You start to look at what LSU needs on the defensive line, like we were just talking about. Relaford has looked good at the edge position, that defensive end spot. So that's another. Those are three guys that I think you leave spring ball, Sam, and you say, okay, they could make an impact. Now,
Yeah.
we don't know what's going to happen in the summer and in fall camp, but that's kind of where I sit with just those three names.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, I'm sure as the season goes on, I'm sure someone will develop into a role where maybe they fit in. It's just hard to gauge in the spring. I feel like every spring now I come away and I feel like, well, this freshman, he looks great in spring ball and he looks great in all these scrimmages and practices, and then you just don't see him that much in the season because it's a different game. But there are exceptions to that. Of course, not it's a little off topic, but you look at a guy like Jeremiah Smith, like he feels like an exception to when you
Exactly.
say he looks good in spring ball. I think he'll look good in the regular season. But we touched on the portal a little bit. Are there any departures from LSU that the team is really going to feel that maybe were unexpected or caught them off guard? I know the 5-star tackle heard from the 2023 cycle left, but I'm not quite sure how impactful he was in his freshman year, so I don't know how much that hurts. Are there any transfers in your eyes that you think were kind of surprising to the program?
Yeah, I mean, Zalance Hurd left. You mentioned that, and it kind of feels like forever ago because so much has
Yeah, it
happened
does.
since he
The
entered the
winter
portal. I
program.
kind of honestly, I didn't even think about that. I was thinking spring only for a second, but Zalance Hurd would have been big this year in just terms of look. LSU has 2 NFL tackles. They've got
Mhm.
Emory Jones. They've got Will Campbell. Will Campbell, for a lot of people,
He's
when
a
you look at early
beast.
mock drafts, kid
Yeah.
might be a top 10 pick. Like he's a cornerstone tackle
Yeah.
that a team could draft. So you mentioned with Zalance Hurd, like how much would he really have played this year? And I think that's why he decided to go to Tennessee to try to earn a starting spot off the
Yeah.
jump. So it'll be felt from a terms of depth standpoint, but they've done such a good job there recruiting. It's not you don't want to lose a 5-star, but it's
You're
not
right.
the end of the
It
world.
hurts on paper
Yeah,
more
it
than
hurts
maybe in
on
real
paper,
life.
but when you kind of get to it, it's like okay, it kind of makes sense. They just lost defensive end Jackson Howard, edge rusher, to the portal. Howard was kind of a weird fit to begin with, one of the top players. I believe he was out of the state of Minnesota. You kind
Mhm.
of go back and look at what he was. Great talent. Just kind of got buried on the depth chart. Like that's just kind of the best way to put it. Didn't see a clear path to playing time. And Sam, I always say, and talking with kids and talking with people who help these kind of kids make these decisions, it's one of those things. Like if a guy doesn't see clear playing time going into year 2, he's probably going to move
Yeah,
on. Like,
that feels like the consensus now is you kind of
yeah,
understand when you get the red shirt or you're a freshman, right? Like you don't expect to get on the field, but once it hits year 2 and you feel like maybe I don't know, not the time's running out, but that you're kind of in a zone where NFL is a year from now and you
mhm.
want to start to really make a name for yourself. If you don't see a clear spot for yourself or at least a rotation piece, it feels like a lot of these guys are like now I can make money and go play somewhere else and
Yeah.
it's I feel like that's been a big shift in the dynamic of everything recently.
Yeah, that's the only portal entry really so far for the spring portion, at least. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, they're going to have some guys enter. I don't know if it's going to be from what I'll say from what we expect to happen. It's not going to be high impact guys, and I
Yeah.
mean that with all respect to the guys. It's going to be guys looking for a chance in terms of playing time elsewhere because they're not going to be
Right, right.
getting playing time at LSU. So we'll kind of see. I mean, they're about the scholarship number has to be at 85 for fall camp. They're around 87 right now.
Right, which is the
So
tricky part of the spring portal, is getting under that
yes,
number and adding talent.
yeah, and the crazy thing about it is you don't have to. One of the few things the NCAA does legally enforce, I'll say that, is
Mm.
you don't have to really be at that number until fall camp. So
Yeah,
you could rock with 90 players from here to June, July, and then maybe
make
somebody
cuts.
make
Yeah,
cuts. I mean, it's kind of reminds you of the NFL in a way of
a
like
little
mini
bit.
camp and stuff like that. So I think we'll see a couple guys enter. We'll see a couple guys added, and they'll be confidently around that 85 mark as they get ready for fall camp.
And I'll pull it up from the winter window, which like you just said, feels so long ago already because we've done so much since then. But LSU wasn't a team that was really active in the winter portal. It feels like they were a team that was not reliant on their recruiting classes because that makes it seem like it's bad, but like they utilize their recruiting classes because they've recruited and developed well. They were ranked 58th according to On3 as far as the portal goes. They brought in they didn't bring in too many. It was I think
Yeah.
single digit. Yeah, it's about 7 guys. The biggest one being CJ Daniels, like we discussed. Are any of these other guys maybe kind of flying under the radar in terms of impact players come the season?
Well, you kind of see there at the top of the list, Gio Paez was actually a portal commitment about 2 weeks ago that they were able to get from
Yeah,
Wisconsin, a guy that's just going to be a rotational depth guy on the defensive line. We mentioned C.J. Daniels earlier. I also wanted to point out Jordan Gilbert, who was the first transfer commitment. He's down there,
yeah.
was the 4-star safety from Texas A&M, and this is a guy
We
who
just
is a
lost out.
Baton Rouge native. I mean, he's a guy that was highly sought after in literally his high school. And I kid you not, Sam, his high school football stadium backs up to the LSU football facility. Like that's how much this kid was involved and knew what LSU had. So he transfers back to Baton Rouge, comes back home, and he's going to be a starter. He's going to be one of the starting
Yeah.
safeties. And so, it is a secondary that struggled. I mean, you could talk about Jair Brown, Austin Osbury as well. They had to go get some bodies, and they had to go get some guys that could play. They feel like they did that. My biggest concern is we just got to see it. And I think that's where LSU
Yeah.
fans kind of sit, like it's cool to talk about the rankings. It's cool to talk about who you brought in. But after last season being ranked, in the 100s of pass defense and defense
108th
overall,
overall.
yeah, it's kind of like, let's just prove it on the field. Like, it's cool to
Right.
talk about these things, but let's go prove it on the field. And that's kind of what they're waiting on.
And they'll get their chance. That opening game is the perfect opportunity. That's, Lincoln Riley, the running gun offense of just put as many points up as we can. So they'll have their chance to show for sure. And what's different about the spring portal is just something to point out. As far as SEC goes, I'm pretty sure you can't transfer within. That's the new rule kind of within the SEC, is if you leave in the spring window, from the SEC, you can't transfer within the conference. So a lot of these guys that are leaving SEC schools, they kind of have to, disperse and go to other conferences. The Texas A&M safety, I think, who left this morning or announced recently,
Jacoby
is
Matthews,
the perfect perfect example of that. Just came out and said Florida State and Oregon are the two schools. You got to think he's probably staying in conference if that rule doesn't apply. But that's just something to point out as these transfers kind of develop, because a lot of the elite SEC talent won't be able to get scooped up by other SEC teams. Kind of shift back to recruiting though, but this time to look at 2025, because my goodness, is that class just something else right now for LSU.
Yeah.
4 players ranked number 1 at their respective position. Bryce Underwood, quarterback; DeCorian Moore, receiver; Harlan Berry, running back; and I am blanking on the name of the interior O lineman, I will admit, but
Devin Harper.
That is just ridiculous numbers. Ranked 2nd overall to Ohio State, who's also on a recruiting tear in 2025. What has been the driving factor behind this crazy shift into just being a recruiting powerhouse for this cycle for LSU?
Yeah, so we talked about, really wanting to hone in on in-state. They were able to do that in 2024 with that class. This one for 2025 and 2026, when you start to kind of look at what they could bring to the table, the state of Louisiana is loaded. I mean, it's loaded in terms of talent. Like you talked about, obviously, Harlan Berry. They just picked up another commit this past weekend at the spring game from another in-state running back, JT Lindsay. I've got, some predictions in that they could still, bring in a guy like James Simon. That's potentially 3 in-state running backs that could make their way to Baton Rouge, which is just kind of nuts to think about. So, but you talk about driving force, you got to go look at the top of the list, and it's Bryce Underwood. Anytime you bring in a quarterback like that, and a guy who is not just the number 1 player at his position, but for a large portion is the number 1 player in the country, people feel like. I mean, that is a guy who's going to headline a recruiting class and then in turn going to help recruit other players. It's a big reason, why DeCorian Moore is committed. It's a big reason why uncommitted wide receiver Khalil Lockett out of Texas really loves LSU and was on campus this past weekend and raved about his visit. So you kind of start to look at what makes this class elite. Well, it starts from the top and then the trickle down. Guys want to play with elite skill talent. So when you marry the number 1 quarterback, the number 1 running back, and the number 1 quarterback and wide receiver together, I mean, that's just going to be hard to break. Like, that's going to be a hard thing to break.
And, you got to look at recent history, too. You just had Jaden Daniels win a Heisman. You just had Joe Burrow win a Heisman. So you're seeing good quarterback development. We don't even need to really bring up names as far as wide receiver goes to note the development. It feels like every year now 2 starting LSU wide receivers are getting sent to the NFL to be Pro Bowlers. I mean, this year, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, they're all over the place, really. So it's just, I feel like proven development track record, along with, whether it's Coach Kelly and the NIL presence, plus just Bryce Underwood being there, all of it is just aligning perfectly to give LSU an incredibly stacked class. I mean, this is the look at the class they have committed, but if I pull up just the top commits in general, there are like 3 more as far as 5-star goes that are all decently slated, to maybe have a shot of going to LSU. Khalil Lockett, like you mentioned, and then there's a couple more names. DJ Pickett is favored right now, according to On3. So there's names all around here. I mean, LSU has just been crazy. What do you think, as far as position group goes, is the biggest focus going forward for LSU in this class?
Yeah, I mean, look, the skill talent's fun, and everyone's going to pay attention to that. But it is the defensive side of the football, and it really is secondary and defensive line. It's kind of what we talked about when we talked about the portal. They've just got to build up there. DJ Pickett would be a massive addition, the 5-star
Yeah.
safety. He
And
would be
get him out of
huge.
Miami. I don't want them with him either.
Oh, yeah, there you go. That helps you and it helps
Exactly.
LSU fans. But, if they're able to get DJ Pickett, that's a massive grab as a safety of the future. And the defensive line, like they just have to beef it up. I mean, I mentioned earlier, they had a walk-on playing in the spring game on the second team.
Right.
So
They
they're
had
not
that.
even they're not even four deep at the defensive tackle position, and you have two defensive tackles on the team playing at the same time. So really, you don't have a true four scholarship players that you can rotate out there. So they've got to be able to kind of get into that realm of getting some guys. Yeah, they're in on some different folks, but that big board for them is such a long list. I think it's really going to be sorted out as we kind of get into the summer and kind of towards the end of the summer and high school seasons start to kind of ramp up and you really get a
Mhm.
feel of where they're going to go after that.
As you know, as I'm just scrolling through kind of the ultimate big board, the top 5 stars in the country, are there any potential defensive targets on there that we could see them maybe look to flip? You see like a Justice Terry who's committed to USC right now between, him and Georgia. Florida State's kind of mixed in there, but not, not too heavy. And Elijah Griffin. Could we see any of these others, maybe big defensive names, be potential flip targets for LSU as the season goes on?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you kind of get to kicking the tires on some of these guys, they're going to always stay interested. A couple of the guys you see are going to visit LSU at some point, whether it's this summer or whether it is in the fall for a game day visit. I mean, that like a lot of kids, and I don't blame them. The kids get official visits, go take them,
So use
experience
them, might
something.
as well.
Yeah, use them. I mean, it's a paid, free, all expense trip to go to a college football game. Make sure you use those. I just kind of think that when you look at this list and you really kind of start to just kind of go down, like a guy like Devin Sanchez, committed to Ohio State. That's a guy LSU was perceived to be in on. They're still going to recruit him. He might take a trip down here. I think he's already said publicly he's firmly with Ohio State.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah.
one of the two corners for Ohio State did just say they shut down their commitment, but it's 2024 high school recruiting. How
Who
accurate is that
knows?
statement? How
Who
accurate is
knows?
that statement anymore?
Another one for me. So Sanchez made that public proclamation. Naheem Offord is going to be another guy they're going to continue to look at. The kid from Birmingham, Alabama, also committed to Ohio State. I'll also kind of roll with a couple more names here. They're going to keep lines of communication open with a guy like Isaiah Gibson, who's been a riser in rankings, an edge rusher,
Okay.
currently committed to USC. They're going to keep lines of communication open with another guy, Jonah Williams, who a lot of people feel like is going to go to Oklahoma. He's uncommitted right now, so yeah, they're going to
Yeah.
play they're going to play the flip game. I think teams are really going to start to turn up the heat, and like you said, 2024 recruiting is a whole different beast. So we'll kind of
Right.
see what happens, of course, over the next couple months.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. Obviously, as we get closer, not only do commitments change and all that, but these rankings
Mhm.
change too. So a lot of players are going to shoot up the boards once the season starts, and 7-on-7 continues to progress. So I feel like this is way too early to look at recruiting and really take it super seriously. Because if I pulled up the top 25 right now, you'll probably see 10 to 12 programs that are going to be nowhere near this list come National Signing Day in December. I think Purdue is in the
Exactly.
top 25, and SMU. So that should tell you all you need to know about um, about recruiting right now. But to shift to kind of an outlook for next season, we talk about the offseason a lot because it is right now and it's just what's trending. But when we take a look at next season's schedule, I will admit it doesn't. There are hard games on there. Don't get me wrong, but it's not really the hardest schedule I've ever seen as far as SEC schedules go. I look at a Gators
Mhm.
schedule and I say, wow, that's just the worst thing I've ever
Brutal.
seen. Right. I'm not complaining, but but as far as this schedule goes, I mean, I see 5-0 really. I see 5-0 off the bat. I don't think there should be any sweat as far as other than maybe the USC game. But you see Ole Miss, you see Texas A&M, which they get put at 25 every year now just to lose their first 2 games anyways. You get Alabama and Oklahoma. So when you take a look at this schedule, what was your kind of first reaction when you first saw it?
Yeah, I mean, first off, for fans that have season tickets to home games, it's going to be a fun slate. I mean, you get to
Oh yeah,
welcome Ole Miss, you get to welcome Alabama. Thanksgiving weekend, you get to welcome Oklahoma into town, which is going to be a lot of fun for fans that haven't really got to see that matchup. So
yeah.
UCLA also makes the cross country trip over to Baton Rouge in
New
September. So
quarterback, new coach for them.
yeah, it's a lot of different stuff going on. So, when I look at the schedule, I do kind of agree with you. The expectation should be a 5-0 start. I'm interested to see what that first game of the year looks like. LSU traditionally does not play well. I believe they've lost their last 4 or 5 opening games of the season because they've
Yeah,
always been in that primetime slot, it kind of feels like. So
yeah,
you should
definitely.
be 5-0, though, Sam, kind of going into Ole Miss. I mean, that should be the expectation.
And you're coming off a
And
bye too.
that's huge. And
It
yeah,
is
no, it's
huge.
huge. You're playing it at home. Home crowd's going to be going crazy. Um, once you kind of get to that back half of the schedule, like Ole Miss is going to be a tough game, no doubt about it. You should
Mhm.
be able to go on the road and beat Arkansas. I think you
Yeah,
should be able to go beat Texas A&M. Kind of look
right,
at it after that. It's like Ole Miss, Bama, and Oklahoma. And I think they could
right.
beat Oklahoma. So it kind of comes down to Ole Miss and Bama, and can you reach that 10-win mark? And look, if you win 10 games in the SEC, you got a pretty good shot at the playoff.
Oh, 100%, especially with an expanded playoffs this year. My buddy that I host this podcast with, he's a huge Florida Gators fan. That's kind of what makes us have so much fun, is that we're all just fans of rival teams in Florida, so we can bounce off each other that way. He'll tell you the Florida Gators are the hardest game on the schedule. I'll respond by showing him Jaden Daniels highlights from last year's game. But that should be a fun game. I might actually end up going to that Florida Gators one in Gainesville because it should be fun. But even when you look at an Alabama, right, they got a new coach, lost a lot of pieces on offense. It's a whole new thing in here. This isn't Nick Saban anymore. So even that at home becomes much more winnable. Oklahoma, Jackson Arnold, how legit is he going to be? How are they going to
Yeah.
get welcomed to the SEC? It's a lot of question marks outside of Ole Miss. But when you look at the schedule, if you had to give me kind of like a floor and like a realistic prediction, what would your floor for this team be in 2024?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think you can go below the 9. I think 9 wins has to be the floor.
Yeah.
It'll be a disappointing season, and I'll argue this too. Depending on who your 3 losses are to and the margin of victory, I do sit in the camp of where an SEC team is going to make it at some point in this expanded playoff
Oh, I think it'll be this
with
year.
3 losses. I mean,
Yeah, I
you
think that'll
kind
be
of look at the
this year.
schedule. I mean, if you go 9-3 with like a field goal loss to Ole Miss, a field goal loss to Bama,
Hmm.
and a field goal loss to like USC. I mean, 3
Right.
games, by 9 points.
Because you'd
You got a
probably
pretty
have
good
to
shot
be
of
one
getting
of
in.
those good ranked teams, just to
Yeah.
say that you have a worthy resume. But I totally agree, and I think that'll happen this year, if anything, where a 9-3 SEC team gets in.
No, I agree with you. So I think the floor's got to be 9 games. The realistic prediction for me is, I think if I had to pick it right now, and obviously rosters,
Right. It's still super early. It's just kind of
yeah,
gauging.
I'm going 10-2. Like I think that 10-2 is somewhere where I can sit and I feel like I need to see something before I can say they can go beat Ole Miss and Bama.
Right.
But I feel like the way they are constructed now, they could win 10 games if they were to
Yeah.
play tomorrow. So we'll see.
And as far as the ceiling goes, I said 11-1 personally. Do you think
Yeah.
that that's a realistic ceiling too?
Well, I mean, I do. Is it crazy to think 12-0? Because like if you can beat Ole Miss,
No, honestly, no. If you beat Ole Miss at home, I mean,
you
Alabama's
get Ole
really
Miss and
beatable
Bama
at
at
home.
home. Like
Yeah,
that's the thing.
and
Um,
Oklahoma, all 3 of the hardest ones are at home.
exactly. So I think ceiling's 12-0 and going
Yeah,
to Atlanta for the SEC title game, and you get there and you got a chance to be the number 1 overall seed.
right. I
So
mean, you'll probably play Georgia or Texas because those 2 all play each other and beat each
exactly.
other up schedule wise.
Exactly. So, 12-0 is the ceiling to me. Floor 9-3, and prediction. I'm going to go way too early prediction. We'll have to revisit it before the season.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm going 10-2 though. That's kind of where I sit right now.
Yeah, I said 10-2 as far as a prediction when I just looked over at the schedule realistically. If I'm looking like absolute worst case scenario floor, like defense is just as bad as last year, maybe a little worse. And Garrett kind of struggles against legit competition. I said the worst was 8-4. And
Mhm.
even that feels like just unrealistic. I said 10-2, and then I put 11-1 for the ceiling because I think between Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oklahoma, I just find a hard time seeing 12-0.
Yeah.
But that's just me personally. We talked about a 12-team expanded playoffs. Is there, what qualifies this season as a success for LSU, given the fact that it is now an expanded playoffs, and you're looking at the schedule? What qualifies this season as a success in your eyes?
Making the playoff. Like
Yeah,
that
just an
has to be the
appearance.
floor, I believe, for what LSU needs to be and the expectation going forward. This is a program you mentioned earlier. It's a big brand. They
Right,
have a
it is,
big,
yeah.
big name head coach. They have everything that you would want to build a program. They've got the returning quarterback that, while he doesn't have a lot of game experience, people think he's going to be really good just because he's an unexperienced quarterback. We'll call it that, experienced,
Right.
unexperienced. Um, so I think playoff, like it's a playoff or bust. And then, kind of like March Madness, Sam, honestly, you
Yeah,
just get to the playoff and see what happens because it's
right,
gotten so big now. It's like maybe you have, a matchup that doesn't favor you very well, but it's one game. So who
right.
knows what can happen in that one game?
Especially if you
So
draw
yeah.
maybe the Big 12 champ and it's like a relatively weaker Utah compared to the others, then that's your first
Mhm.
round, and before you know it, you're already competing for the semifinals. Like, it just anything can happen.
Yeah, I think it's going to be crazy to see like some 9-3 SEC teams upsetting like 11-1 or 12-1,
Right.
Big 12 ACC champions,
Yeah.
because the level of competition that they
It's
had
just
the
different.
gauntlet's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Now, I do think home playoff games are going to make a difference. I think, it almost does offset kind of that competition balance a little bit, because
True.
while maybe you were the better team in a tougher conference, now you also have the disadvantage of having to go on the road to a Utah where that team just does not lose outside of Oregon in the
Yes,
last
true.
couple years. So, stuff like that is why I think this model has the potential to be really good, and it's going to be really fun. From a pure like speculative, standpoint, no like realisticness kind of put behind this. Is there job pressure on Kelly if the season flops and it's like a 9-3 like last year? The defense goes nowhere. Maybe lose a bad game to a USC again on opening night. I'm not saying that this would actually happen, but is there a chance that there gets put job pressure on him going into next year if the season kind of goes south?
Yeah, I mean, if the season, well, first off, at a place like LSU, and Kelly's acknowledged this, there's always pressure.
Fair
Now,
enough.
to what
Fair enough.
level, I think is kind of what your question is getting at, because the
Yeah.
natural pressure that you're going to have at LSU is compete for championships. If this team flops, if they go below 9 wins, let's say they finished 8-4, um, yeah, there's going to be pressure because it's a win now mentality everywhere. We're seeing that with the portal. We're seeing that with college football.
And you have to impress these recruits so they don't leave.
Exactly, exactly. So I think that if it flops, the heat's going to get turned up. Now, realistically, are they going to fire Brian Kelly?
Probably
They'd
not.
they'd
I'm sure
have
that
they'd have to
buyout is
go.
massive.
Yeah, they'd have to go like 3-9. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about like really really bad. But I do agree with you. Like if they do not if they don't win 9 games or more, there's going to be pressure.
Yeah.
Maybe turned up a little more of like, hey, what are we doing here? Because we can't look. This. You can't afford to fall behind if you're a
No.
program now because
You
it's
really
just an
can't.
arms
It takes a
race at
while
this
to claw
point.
it back. I mean, I just lived through like 5 years of clawing back, and
Exactly.
even then, we're not all the way back. So it is very real.
No, you're exactly right, and so I think the pressure will turn up. There's already going to be pressure, but the pressure will turn up if they do flop this season.
Yeah, and again, it's just speculative. The last person I talked to is from Notre Dame, and obviously Kelly came over from there. They replaced Marcus Freeman, and we were talking about how they're another team that's in this position where if they don't make a, not a deep run, but you probably got to win a round. Marcus
Yeah,
Freeman, who was his replacement, is maybe not gone, but certainly in a very hot seat. We both agreed on that. So it would almost be kind of the two teams are now kind of in a similar spot as they not swap coaches, but they take Notre Dame's coach and Notre Dame replaces him. Now they both find themselves in similar spaces where they need a deep playoff run, and that's going to kind of be a side effect of this new 12-team playoff. Is a lot more
yeah,
pressure on coaches to win now.
yeah. No, I agree. I mean, if you're not making the 12-team playoff and you're at one of the schools that can be in the NIL game, you're
Yeah.
supposed to be amongst one of the elite recruiting classes. You're going to cycle through coaches pretty quickly.
Yeah, which again, that's just the environment that we're in now. It's a win now. It's a spend money, win now, and if you
Mhm.
don't, you're going on to the next. Which we'll see how it works out going forward. But it should be interesting to see. But that's kind of all I have for you today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we kind of wrap it up here?
No, I mean, other than the fact, appreciate you having me on. It's a fun
Of
time to
course,
talk college football, and just kind of
always.
talk about these things because there really truly is no off season. I guess we could say it
No,
never stops. I don't know when we're going to sleep, at all. Maybe sometime in the summer during the dead period, but
yeah, the
bef-
1 month before the season starts.
exactly. So, but no, man, I appreciate you having me on and pumped to see another college football season and see what LSU can do.
Agreed, and thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come here. I'll be in touch because we're gonna have to get you back on before the season starts after this portal window closes. But you're right, this is the best time of the year. You know, it's the heart of the off season before we get to the dead period, and it's just so fun to talk about these things. As always, guys, remember to like the video, subscribe, and comment down below what you want to see more of. Always catering to your interests. We've got a NBA playoff prediction coming out soon, NFL mock draft, a bunch of stuff like that. Bryce, thank you again, man. I really appreciate you being here. And until next time.